Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Barry Beckham. Here I offer a couple of practical sound tips for your PTE-AV-Studio presentations. I made the presentation you can see displayed here recently, and it was a second one that I've made based on a poem. I'll link to both of those presentations below. What we're viewing here is the completed show in the timeline window of PTE-AV-Studio. In a recent video called The Making of an Audiovisual, I said that it's quite important that each line of a poem is recorded as a separate sound file, ideally one line for each file. How do we know in advance how much time we're going to need between each line of the poem? Well, of course we don't until we begin synchronizing the pictures with the entire soundtrack. Now, I used the poem in this presentation in 16 separate parts, but here's the problem with this. Now, I needed to edit each of those sound files before I used them. The spoken word needs editing because most of us don't have access to a soundproof studio. We're often recording sitting beside a computer, and that alone is going to create some background noise. Now, we can record our commentary directly into PTE-AV-Studio via the project options and the audio tab. But for the sound editing, I usually turn to Audacity sound editing software. With this particular presentation, I needed to make 5 different sound edits for each of the 16 sections of the poem, and that doesn't include the importing or the exporting of each file. So you can appreciate 5 edits applied to 16 recordings could be just a little tedious. Now, there is another way we can go about this. We can create the poem in one recording. Then we can edit the sound quality using what we've got open at the moment, which is Audacity. We only have to do the quality the once, and then when we get the audio into PTE-AV-Studio later, we can split it into sections. So let's look at importing and editing the original recording of my poem in Audacity. Incidentally, you can use Audacity to make recordings. There's the record button, just hook up your microphone and press record. So to start the sound editing in Audacity, I need to go to File, Import. I need to navigate to the folder I'm working in, my project folder. There's the poem audio that I want, and I can click Open. First thing to do is to deal with the noise. And the best way to do that is to zoom in to the WAV file, because what we need to do is to look for a part of the recording which we expect to be silent. Generally speaking, it's going to be at the start, but here, of course, I've got a silent part between each of the sentences. But I'll just click just before I start to speak. It's important I don't include any of that. And I'll click and drag. So what I'm saying to Audacity is, what I want to do is to fix the noise in this whole WAV file based on a sample we can take from here. To do that, we go to Effect, Noise Reduction, and click to get a noise profile. Once we have that, we can select the entire WAV file. Control A will do that. Then back into the effect, and we can apply that profile. Just takes a few seconds to apply. It's that easy. Now, the next stage for me is to increase the bass and treble. Now, if you're going to use the options I'm going through here, they're probably going to vary very slightly because they're dependent upon the quality of your original recording. You may have less bass than me originally and need a little more. You may need a little less. So just bear that in mind. But I found through trial and error that if I go back to Effect, Bass and Treble, if I put 13 in the bass and about 3 in the treble and apply, and close. That seems to meet most of my requirements. Next stage is to normalize my WAV file. Again, back to the same option, Effect, and we need to go down to Normalize when I can find it. There it is. And I'm just going to select the default values here. And finally, before I export the file back into Effect for the last time, I'm going to amplify this just a little bit. A couple of decibels, OK to that. All I have to do now is to File, Export. I generally export as a WAV file these days, and it's gone to the right folder, so all I need to do is to give this a name. So I'll just call this the polished version so I can easily find it. Now we can go back into PTE-AV-Studio. Now if you look into the file list, you can see that I've just highlighted the poem audio polished, which we exported from Audacity just a few seconds ago. What I need to do next then is to drag that down into the timeline, but because I'm using a completed show to demonstrate to you, I've already got a poem in place, and my poem is all in different sections. So to remove all of those, probably the quickest way, and this is another tip rather than highlight each one and hit delete because we've got 16 of them, if I go to the bottom left corner, the project options, and I go to my audio tab, I can identify track 3 because that's got all of the takes that I've used, and I can just hit the little cross and OK. There you can see we've cleared the decks. All I need to do now is to pick up my WAV file and drag it down. All I need to do with my poem audio now is to identify the gap between the first line and the second line. And that's there. And then between the second line and the third is there. So what I need to do is to just click to bring my cursor to that position. Go down to the poem audio, right click and choose split. It's as simple as that. I can click and drag to move the rest of the poem to the right. Just give myself a little bit of space to be able to determine where this needs to be. Now I think it needs to be somewhere down here, but of course we don't know until we actually put the cursor just prior to, let's say, that point there and press play. But what I may do is just go back to the start here and let's take a look right up to when I start to speak. Infrared light, beyond what we can see. It's all around, but it's hidden from me. There you can see it's positioned just about right, but of course I've got some leeway here to move it a little bit to the left, and we're all going to choose something slightly different. But I do now have the flexibility to move my cursor down to this position and do the same again, and then move on to the next part of my slideshow. Let me just move my cursor because we've got half of one picture and the half of another showing there. That's better. It may be useful perhaps if I went through this particular screen and just explain exactly how I put the audio together here. The first part you heard, which you can see just coming up from no volume here up to 100% here, is that intro piece of music called Attraction. Now it was deliberate obviously to cut it off really sharp and then introduce that little electronic whine which only runs from this little blue dot, this audio key point, to this one here. But this track contains the music, so there's the second part of the music, and I think I used a third part too. In the middle track I'm using any sound effects that I think are warranted, and that leaves that third track for all sections of the poem. Now, with the spinning round of the screen, what I've done is to close down the slideshow I was using to record this video, and I've reopened the one we saw right at the start, my original. Now, the reason I've done that is when I got to this section of the slideshow I was making, I found that the words here were coming too quick for what I wanted to show on screen. Let me put my cursor at that position. I'll drop the sound of my music down just a little bit, and I'm going to press play and just let you listen to the end of that part of the poem. Let's start in the middle so we're not starting mid-word. Does it have colour? Red, green, or blue? You can see that I really needed to either re-record that section and leave a greater gap between the words red, green and then blue, but of course I needed to just put my cursor in that position, right click and split it, and that allows me to move that further to the right. Now, if we do exactly the same thing, does it have colour? Red, green, or blue? It's much better balanced, and if I really wanted to, I could even do exactly the same with the green if I wanted to split this WAV file and just move that a fraction to the right. Sometimes very small movements do make a difference to the visual and the sound of our show. One of the other sound options we have in this software is the ability to mix all of the tracks you can see here down into just one WAV file or perhaps an MP3. Now, the command to do this is tucked away where you may not be expecting to find it. In the timeline, we go just to the left of the mini player start button, and here we get the opportunity to export the soundtrack file. Now, we get the opportunity to choose an MP3 or a WAV file. Here I'll choose a WAV and OK, and then I'm asked where I'd like to place it. I'll just give that a slightly different name so that I can pick it out in a few moments, but when I click save, all of those tracks are mixed down into one. It's probably a good idea, if you feel you do have the need to mix down all of these tracks, to make sure you do retain your sound in its original tracks as well. You don't want to reduce your creative options. If you're viewing this video on YouTube, can I ask you to consider subscribing to my channel? But unless you hit the notification bell as well, you won't be informed whenever I post a new video. I'm going to include links below to the presentations I mentioned earlier in this video, plus a link to the Audacity sound editing software. It really is a great piece of software used by many audio-visual enthusiasts. And can I also remind you, you can download this video in HD quality from my website. I'll see you next time.